The Vexmi are not the kind of species you want to mess with on a good day. On a bad day? Well, let's just say that even black holes give them a wide berth out of professional courtesy. These walking nightmares stand 8 feet tall, sport claws that could shred titanium like tissue paper, and possess a hunting instinct so finely tuned that they can track a mouse across 3 solar systems using nothing but sheer bloody-mindedness. So when Calvex, one of their most decorated warriors, a being who once single-handedly cleared a space pirate stronghold just because they were playing their music too loud, discovered that his twin cubs had vanished from their supposedly impregnable den on Station Nexus 5, the entire galactic community collectively held its breath. Not out of sympathy, mind you, out of sheer, pants-wetting terror. The cubs, Zek and Vel, had been sleeping peacefully in their reinforced habitat just 6 hours earlier. The den itself was a marvel of engineering. Force fields, biometric locks, environmental controls that could maintain perfect Vexmi atmospheric conditions, and security measures that would make a military fortress weep with envy. The kind of place where even a quantum thief would think twice before attempting entry. And yet, empty. Completely, utterly, impossibly empty. Calvex's roar when he made the discovery could be heard 3 decks away, causing a crystalline diplomat to shatter into 17 pieces from pure shock. Emergency protocols activated faster than you could say diplomatic immunity, and within minutes, Station Nexus 5 was locked down tighter than a miser's purse strings. Commander Max, the station's human administrator, found himself in the unenviable position of trying to coordinate a search for 2 missing apex predator cubs while simultaneously preventing a galaxy-wide panic. Humans, bless their optimistic little hearts, had somehow convinced the rest of the galaxy that they were the perfect choice for diplomatic and administrative roles. After all, they were harmless enough, couldn't hunt their way out of a paper bag, preferred talking to fighting, and had an almost pathological need to help everyone get along. "Sir, we've got search teams deploying to all sections," reported Lieutenant Kim from the security desk, her voice tight with barely controlled hysteria. "The Vexmi are, well, they're being very thorough." Very thorough was something of an understatement. When a Vexmi searches for something, they don't just look under every rock. They interrogate the rock, run a full background check on its mineral composition, and then slice it into neat uniform pieces, just to be absolutely certain it's not hiding anything. The security footage from the Cubs' den told a story that made absolutely no sense. At 0300 hours, 2 adorable balls of fluff were curled up together, fast asleep. At 0900 hours, nothing but empty bedding remained. 6 hours of footage showed absolutely nothing. No intruders, no anomalous energy readings, no convenient plot devices that might explain how 2 creatures the size of house cats had simply vanished. "Commander," came another voice over the comm, this one belonging to Chief Security Officer Barnes. "We're picking up trace pheromone markers leading toward the research sectors. The trail is unusual." Unusual was rapidly becoming the word of the day. The scent trail wasn't consistent with kidnapping or forced removal. Instead, it meandered through the station's corridors like a pair of curious tourists on their first vacation, stopping here and there to investigate interesting smells before continuing on their merry way. Meanwhile, other species representatives were arriving at the command center with theories that ranged from the merely improbable to the completely insane. The Zephyrian ambassador was convinced it was the work of interdimensional pirates. The Molten delegate suspected corporate espionage. The Christek Collective had calculated that the probability of natural disappearance was 0.000000012%, which meant they were dealing with either advanced alien technology or really, really bad luck. Through it all, Calvex paced the command center like a caged hurricane, his massive form casting shadows that seemed to move independently of the light sources. Every few minutes, he would emit a low growl that made the station's hull vibrate sympathetically, and his golden eyes, each the size of a dinner plate, swept the room with the kind of intensity usually reserved for targeting systems. "Commander Max," Calvex rumbled, his voice carrying the sort of harmonics that suggested unspeakable violence was never more than a heartbeat away. "Your species claims expertise in cooperation, in finding peaceful solutions. Find my cubs." The way he said it made it clear that failure was not an option. Neither was delay, or excuses, or, frankly, continued existence if the cubs weren't found safe and sound in very short order. Max nodded with the kind of calm professionalism that comes from years of dealing with crises, though the slight tremor in his hands suggested he was well aware of exactly how precarious his position had become. "We will, Calvex. The entire station is mobilizing. If they're here, we'll find them." What Max didn't mention, because it would have been poor diplomatic form, was that if the cubs had somehow been harmed, the Vexmi response would likely involve turning Nexus 5 into the galaxy's most expensive pile of scrap metal. The Vexmi didn't just hold grudges. They cultivated them, nurtured them, and then unleashed them with the kind of systematic thoroughness that made natural disasters look like minor inconveniences. The search teams fanned out across the station with military precision. Vexmi warriors moved through the corridors like living shadows, their enhanced senses cataloging every scent, every sound, every microscopic detail that might lead them to the missing cubs. Security drones whirred overhead, their sensors sweeping for any trace of biological signatures that matched the cubs' genetic markers. Even the station's AI had been pressed into service, running probability calculations and analyzing patrol patterns with the desperate efficiency of a computer that really, really didn't want to be recycled into spare parts. And somewhere in the research wing of Nexus 5, completely oblivious to the unfolding drama, Dr. Luna sat hunched over her workstation, lost in the fascinating world of xenobiological adaptation patterns. Her coffee had gone cold hours ago, her back ached from poor posture, and she had that peculiar glazed look that comes from staring at data charts until the numbers start forming little dance formations in front of your eyes. The irony, of course, was that while the entire station was in an uproar over the missing cubs, the cubs themselves were perfectly content with their current situation. They had found something far better than their sterile, secure den. They had found a human. The search teams deployed across Nexus 5 with the kind of methodical precision that would have made a military academy weep tears of pure joy. Vexmi warriors stalked through the corridors like 8-foot-tall nightmares with a very specific shopping list, their nostrils flaring as they tracked scent trails that would be invisible to lesser species. Security drones hummed overhead in perfect formation, their sensors sweeping every nook and cranny with the enthusiasm of metal bloodhounds. And then there were the Mindari. The Mindari were what happened when evolution decided that regular telepathy wasn't quite invasive enough, so it created a species that could read thoughts, emotions, and that embarrassing thing you did when you were 12 that you thought nobody knew about. 3 of them had volunteered to help with the search, floating through the station like jellyfish made of pure psychic energy and bad intentions. "We sense confusion," announced Fluxandra, the lead Mindari, her voice echoing in everyone's heads simultaneously. "Fear, panic, and, surprisingly, Someone is thinking about sandwich combinations. This is not helpful for finding cubs. Commander Max rubbed his temples, feeling the beginnings of what promised to be a truly spectacular headache. Can you focus on the cubs specifically? Any trace of their mental signatures? Young Vexmi minds are intense, like tiny suns of hunger and curiosity. We should be able to detect them easily. Fluxandra paused, her ethereal form shimmering with concentration. Strange. We sense something small and predatory, but it is content? Happy? This does not match expected parameters for kidnapped cubs. Meanwhile, in Research Lab Delta 9, Dr. Luna was having a breakthrough of her own, though it had absolutely nothing to do with missing cubs and everything to do with the mating rituals of Andromedan slug bears. She'd been working on environmental adaptation protocols for 3 different species, trying to determine optimal habitat conditions for interspecies stations like Nexus 5. Her current project involved creating artificial ecosystems that could accommodate the needs of juvenile alien species. A bit of research that the universe was about to reveal had more practical application than she'd ever imagined. Fascinating, she murmured to herself, adjusting her glasses and squinting at the holographic display showing atmospheric composition charts. The juvenile development phase requires 17% more humidity than adult specimens, but the temperature needs to be... She trailed off, making notes in the margins of her datapad with the kind of focused intensity that suggested she'd completely forgotten that the outside world existed. Which, to be fair, she had. Luna had been working for 16 hours straight, sustained by nothing but caffeine, determination, and a chocolate bar she'd found in her desk drawer. The chocolate had been a gift from her nephew, some earth delicacy that was supposedly artisanal and ethically sourced, whatever that meant. She'd eaten half of it around midnight, leaving the rest wrapped on her desk as an emergency sugar reserve. What she didn't know was that Earth chocolate contained compounds that were essentially alien catnip to Vexmi cubs. The scent was drifting through the station's ventilation system like an olfactory beacon, calling to any young Vexmi within range with the irresistible promise of something wonderful and new. Back in the main corridors, Calvex was leading his own search team, with the single-minded focus of a parent whose children were missing and whose patience was measured in microseconds. His massive claws left gouges in the metal flooring as he moved, and his golden eyes swept every surface with predatory intensity. "The trail grows stronger here," he rumbled, pausing at a junction near the research sectors. "They went this way. Recently." The security team following him exchanged nervous glances. Calvex, in protective parent mode, was like watching a natural disaster with opposable thumbs and a very personal stake in the outcome. "Sir," ventured Security Chief Barnes, "the readings are consistent with voluntary movement. There's no sign of struggle or coercion. It's almost like they were exploring." Calvex's head snapped around with mechanical precision, fixing Barnes with a stare that could have melted steel. "Vexmi cubs do not explore without permission. They are disciplined, obedient. They would never." He was interrupted by a soft chiming from the security scanner in Barnes's hand. The device had picked up biological signatures matching the cubs' genetic markers, and they were close. Very close. "This way," Barnes said, his voice tight with excitement and terror in equal measure. "The readings are strongest toward Lab Delta 9. The search party moved through the research wing like a small army, their footsteps echoing in the normally quiet corridors. Other researchers poked their heads out of their labs to see what the commotion was about, took one look at Calvex's expression, and decided that discretion was definitely the better part of valor. Dr. Luna, of course, heard none of this. She was deep in the zone, that magical state of scientific focus where the universe narrowed to nothing but data points and theoretical applications. Her noise-canceling headphones were playing soft classical music. Her attention was completely absorbed by her research, and she was utterly, blissfully unaware that she was about to become the center of the biggest diplomatic incident in Nexus 5's history. The trail led directly to her lab door. Barnes checked his scanner again, just to be sure. The readings were unmistakable. 2 juvenile Vexmi, alive and healthy, somewhere inside Lab Delta 9. The motion sensors were picking up minimal movement, slow, rhythmic patterns that suggested sleeping. Impossible, Calvex growled, but there was something different in his voice now. Confusion was mixing with the rage, creating a cocktail of emotions that was somehow even more terrifying than pure fury. Commander Max, who had arrived with the search party, stepped forward with the careful movements of someone who knew that the next few minutes could determine whether Nexus 5 remained structurally intact. Doctor, Luna is one of our most respected researchers, he said quietly. She specializes in xenobiology, particularly juvenile development patterns for various species. If the cubs are in there... He didn't finish the sentence, but everyone understood the implication. If the cubs were in Luna's lab, either she was the galaxy's most unlikely kidnapper, or something very strange was happening. The motion sensors continued to show those slow, rhythmic patterns. Peaceful, content, safe. Calvex studied the readouts with the expression of someone trying to solve a particularly complex equation using only violent thoughts and parental instincts. The data made no sense. His cubs were in there. That much was certain. But they weren't distressed, weren't calling for help, weren't exhibiting any of the behaviors he would expect from kidnapped Vexmi young. Perhaps, suggested the Zephyrian ambassador, who had somehow managed to flutter his way down to the research level despite having approximately the same mass as a soap bubble. The human has developed some form of mind control device. Your species has shown remarkable ingenuity in... Humans, interrupted Commander Max, with the weary tone of someone who had spent considerable time explaining basic facts to panic-stricken diplomats. Don't do mind control. They barely manage regular control most days. Dr. Luna's research is purely observational and theoretical. The molten delegate, a being that looked like someone had taught lava to walk upright and develop opinions, bubbled ominously. Then, explain the scent trail. Explain the lack of distress signals. Explain why 2 apex predator cubs would voluntarily remain in proximity to a prey species. It was a fair point, albeit delivered by someone whose natural speaking voice sounded like a volcano clearing its throat. The assembled search party stared at the lab door as if it might suddenly reveal all its secrets through sheer force of collective confusion. Dr. Luna, meanwhile, had reached that peculiar stage of exhaustion where everything became hilariously fascinating. She was currently staring at a molecular diagram that looked suspiciously like a cartoon character making rude gestures, and she couldn't quite remember if that was intentional or if her brain was finally staging a revolt against coherent thought. Atmospheric nitrogen levels for juvenile Calorian phase development, she mumbled to herself, making notes that would probably make no sense whatsoever when she reviewed them in the morning. Increase by... What was I talking about? She glanced around her lab with the unfocused gaze of someone operating on 3 hours of sleep and enough caffeine to power a small starship. Her workspace was a testament to organized chaos. Data pads stacked in precarious towers, holographic displays showing incomprehensible charts, and research samples that would have made a xenobiologist's heart, sing with joy. And there, on her desk, was the other half of that chocolate bar. Still wrapped, still emanating those wonderful aromatic compounds that were currently driving two young Vexmi absolutely wild with curiosity and desire. Outside her lab, the debate was intensifying. "We should simply enter," Calvex declared, his patience finally reaching its theoretical limit. "Retrieve my cubs, determine the truth of this situation through direct observation, and, if necessary, aggressive interrogation." "Now hold on," Max said, stepping between the 8-foot killing machine and the lab door with the kind of casual bravery that suggested either tremendous courage or a complete disconnect from reality. "Dr. Luna is a civilian researcher. If she's somehow involved in this, and that's a very big if, we need to handle it diplomatically." "Diplomatically," Calvex repeated, as if the word left a bad taste in his mouth. "Your species and your endless talking. While we handle things diplomatically, my cubs remain missing." "Actually," interjected Fluxandra, her psychic voice cutting through the argument with the subtlety of a mental sledgehammer, "they are not missing anymore. We know exactly where they are. The question is why they choose to remain there." The Mindari's observation was perfectly logical and utterly infuriating in the way that only perfectly logical observations could be. Yes, they knew where the cubs were. No, they didn't understand why. And no amount of standing in the corridor arguing about diplomatic protocols was going to change either of those facts. Barnes checked his scanner again, more out of nervous habit than any expectation that the readings had changed. They hadn't. Two small life forms, biological signatures matching the missing cubs, vitals strong and steady, movement patterns suggesting deep sleep. "Sir," he said to Commander Max, "whatever's happening in there, the cubs appear to be comfortable, relaxed. If they were being held against their will, we'd expect to see elevated stress indicators, increased heart rates, pacing behaviors. Instead, we're seeing patterns consistent with natural rest cycles." It was the kind of observation that should have been reassuring, but somehow managed to make the entire situation even more bizarre. Kidnapped cubs didn't take naps. They certainly didn't take peaceful, comfortable naps while their father assembled a small army outside their prison door. Unless, of course, it wasn't a prison at all. The thought occurred to several members of the search party simultaneously, creating one of those awkward moments where everyone realized they might have been operating under completely incorrect assumptions, but nobody wanted to be the first to say it out loud. Whatever was happening in Lab Delta 9, it wasn't what anyone expected. The moment of truth arrived with all the dramatic timing of a badly directed holodrama. Commander Max stepped forward, placed his hand on the lab door's access panel, and paused for what felt like 17 eternities, but was probably only 3 seconds. "Dr. Luna," he called through the intercom, his voice carrying that special tone reserved for defusing intergalactic incidents. "This is Commander Max. We need to speak with you immediately. It's urgent." From inside the lab came the sound of someone knocking over what was probably a very expensive piece of scientific equipment, followed by a string of words that would have made a Calorian dock worker blush. Dr. Luna's voice came through the speaker with the clarity of someone who had just been jolted out of a research-induced trance by the realization that the outside world still existed. "Commander? What time is it? Did I miss the morning briefing again? I swear I just sat down for a minute to check these atmospheric readings and—" "Luna," Max interrupted gently, "we're coming in. Don't be alarmed by the rather large group of people with us." Rather large group was something of an understatement. The corridor outside Lab Delta 9 now resembled a small military operation crossed with a diplomatic summit and seasoned with barely controlled panic. Calvex loomed over everyone like a monument to parental fury. The Mindari floated nearby like psychic storm clouds, and various security personnel tried to look professional, while secretly wondering if their life insurance policies covered death by angry alien parent. The lab door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a scene that would be burned into the memories of everyone present for the rest of their natural lives. Dr. Luna sat slumped over her desk, her dark hair escaping from what had once been a professional ponytail and now looked like it had been styled by a small tornado. Her lab coat was wrinkled, her glasses were askew, and she had the glazed expression of someone who had been staring at data screens for so long that reality had become negotiable. But that wasn't the part that made everyone freeze in their tracks. The part that made everyone freeze was the fact that curled up on her chest, like two furry, purring hot water bottles, were Zek and Vel. The missing Vexmi cubs were fast asleep, their small forms rising and falling with Dr. Luna's breathing, their tiny claws kneading contentedly at the fabric of her lab coat. The silence that followed was the kind of complete, absolute quiet that usually preceded either enlightenment or catastrophic explosions. Every person in the doorway, and several of the non-persons, stared at the scene with expressions ranging from bewilderment to outright disbelief. Calvex's reaction was perhaps the most dramatic. The 8-foot predator, who had been prepared to tear apart the station bolt by bolt to find his cubs, made a sound that started as a growl, shifted to something like a whimper, and ended in what could only be described as confused parental baffling. What? How? He managed, his usual eloquent threats temporarily replaced by the kind of linguistic shutdown that occurred when reality refused to cooperate with expectations. Dr. Luna, meanwhile, had registered the presence of what appeared to be half the station's population crowding into her lab. She blinked owlishly at them, then looked down at her chest, where two small, fuzzy creatures were doing their best impression of the galaxy's most dangerous security blankets. "Oh," she said, with the calm acceptance of someone whose brain had given up trying to process unusual situations hours ago. "Hello there, little ones. How did you get—" She trailed off, her sleep-deprived mind trying to catch up with a situation that would have been challenging even at full mental capacity. The cubs were warm, soft, and making tiny purring sounds that seemed to vibrate through her entire torso. They were also, she was beginning to realize, probably not supposed to be there. "Dr. Luna," Commander Max said carefully, stepping into the lab with the cautious movements of someone navigating a diplomatic minefield. "These are Zek and Vel. They've been missing for several hours." "Missing?" Luna looked around at the assembled crowd, taking in Calvex's imposing presence, the floating Mindari, and the various security personnel who were trying very hard not to point weapons at what was obviously a completely innocent civilian. Oh dear. They're not supposed to be here, are they?" Fluxandra drifted closer, her psychic presence washing over the scene like a scanner made of pure nosiness. "The human genuinely did not know," she announced to the room. "Her mind shows no deception, no awareness of any wrongdoing. She is confused, also very tired, and thinking about coffee." "I could really use some coffee," Luna admitted, carefully placing her hands on either side of the cubs to prevent them from falling as she shifted position. "I've been working all night on environmental adaptation protocols for juvenile xenobiological specimens, and I think I may have lost track of time, and space, and possibly my sanity." Zek chose that moment to open one sleepy golden eye, regard the assembled crowd with the kind of casual disdain that only very young creatures could manage, and then promptly went back to sleep. Vel didn't even bother opening her eyes, just snuggled deeper into the warmth of Luna's lab coat and continued purring. The cubs were, quite obviously, exactly where they wanted to be. Calvex took a step forward, his massive form filling the doorway, and for a moment, everyone in the lab held their breath. This was it, the moment when parental instinct would override confusion, when the galaxy's most feared predator would reclaim his young from the soft human who had somehow stolen them. Instead, Calvex did something that nobody, possibly including himself, had expected. He laughed. It started as a low rumble in his chest, building to something that was part relief, part bewilderment, and part grudging admiration. "My fierce warrior cubs," he said, his voice carrying a mixture of pride and exasperation that was universally recognizable as parental frustration, "have apparently decided that a human scientist makes an acceptable nesting location." Dr. Luna looked down at the sleeping cubs, then up at their father, then back at the cubs. "They're really quite lovely," she said softly. "Very warm, and they purr. I didn't know Vexmi purr." "Only the young ones," Calvex replied, and there was something almost gentle in his voice. "And only when they feel completely safe." The implications of that statement settled over the room like a blanket of pure, concentrated irony. The galaxy's most feared predator cubs felt completely safe, sleeping on a human researcher who hadn't even known they were there. Commander Max cleared his throat, breaking the spell of the moment. "Dr. Luna, would you mind explaining how, exactly, this situation came to be? The entire station has been in lockdown for the past 8 hours." "8 hours?" Luna's eyes widened behind her glasses. "But I only sat down to check a few readings around. What time is it now?" 1100 hours, station time," Barnes replied, consulting his chronometer with the expression of someone who had aged considerably in the past day. "Oh." Luna processed this information with the slow deliberation of a computer running on backup power. "That would explain why I'm so hungry, and why my back hurts, and why these little angels are so comfortable. They must have been here for hours." She gently stroked one of Vel's ears, causing the cub to emit a small chirp of contentment that sounded like a miniature version of her father's rumbling vocalizations. The sound had an immediate effect on Calvex, whose posture shifted from threat-ready to something approaching concerned parent watching their child with a stranger. "The scent trail," Calvex said slowly, his analytical mind working through the mystery, "led directly here. You were eating something. Something that attracted them." Luna's gaze drifted to her desk, where the remaining half of the chocolate bar sat innocently among the scattered data pads and research equipment. "Oh, the chocolate. My nephew sent it from Earth. Some artisanal thing with supposedly superior cacao content. I had some around midnight when the hunger pangs got too distracting." Fluxandra's psychic presence sharpened with interest. "Earth chocolate contains compounds that are stimulating to young Vexmi neural pathways. It creates a sensation similar to their natural comfort pheromones, but amplified." "You mean," Commander Max said slowly, "the cubs followed the scent of chocolate like Earth children following the smell of cookies?" "Precisely. Though with significantly more impressive climbing abilities and lock-bypassing skills. The mental image of two tiny predators performing an elaborate heist, motivated entirely by chocolate cravings, was almost too absurd to contemplate. Almost, but not quite, because it was also perfectly consistent with everything they knew about curious young creatures, regardless of species. But how did they get out of their secured habitat? Demanded the molten delegate, his lava voice bubbling with indignation. The security systems were impenetrable. Calvex's expression shifted to something that might have been embarrassment on a smaller, less intimidating creature. Vex, my cubs are resourceful, and I may have underestimated their determination when properly motivated. He means they're tiny escape artists, Luna said with a gentle smile, carefully adjusting her position to better support the sleeping cubs. I've seen similar behavior in dozens of species. Young creatures are naturally curious and surprisingly ingenious when they want something badly enough. The security systems were designed to keep adults out, not to keep motivated children in. Barnes consulted his datapad, scrolling through security logs with the expression of someone solving a particularly frustrating puzzle. The ventilation system, he announced. They use the maintenance shafts. The sensors are calibrated for adult-sized intruders, not cub-sized adventurers. They could have crawled through half the station without triggering a single alarm. Following their noses straight to the source of that irresistible chocolate scent, Max added, shaking his head in amazement. And then what? They just decided to take a nap? I must have been very still, Luna mused, looking down at her unexpected passengers. Very warm and still. To a tired cub, I probably seemed like the perfect sleeping spot, especially after they'd been crawling through ventilation shafts for hours. Zek stirred slightly, opening both golden eyes to survey the crowd with the kind of regal disdain that suggested he found their presence moderately acceptable, but hardly worthy of interrupting his nap. He made a small chirping sound at his father, a sound that somehow conveyed both affection and mild reproach for the noisy interruption. Calvex responded with a low, gentle rumble that was clearly some form of paternal communication. The conversation, if it could be called that, lasted several seconds and consisted entirely of sounds that would have terrified most sentient beings, but clearly represented a perfectly normal family discussion. He says, Calvex translated with what might have been paternal pride, that the human is very comfortable and smells like good things. He asks why we are making so much noise when it is clearly nap time. And what did you tell him? Luna asked, genuinely curious. That his father was worried and had enlisted the help of many loud adults to find him and his sister. He seems unimpressed by this explanation. Indeed, Zek's expression suggested that the concept of adults panicking over a simple adventure was both predictable and slightly disappointing. He settled back against Luna's chest, with the air of someone who had made his position on the matter perfectly clear. The Zephyrian ambassador, who had been silent throughout this exchange, suddenly fluttered forward with excitement. This is unprecedented. A successful interspecies bonding event between a prey species and juvenile apex predators. The diplomatic implications alone. Are that my cubs have excellent judgment in choosing temporary guardians? Calvex interrupted, his tone carrying a warning that suggested further diplomatic analysis might be hazardous to one's health. Dr. Luna looked around at the assembled crowd, the relieved security personnel, the floating psychic entities, the various alien diplomats, and one very large, very protective father, and came to a conclusion that surprised everyone, including herself. Would you like some coffee? She asked. I think I'm going to need several cups to process all of this, and there's no point in doing it alone. The impromptu coffee gathering in Lab Delta 9 turned out to be one of the more surreal diplomatic meetings in galactic history. Dr. Luna managed to extract herself from beneath the sleeping cubs by employing a technique she'd learned from studying maternal behaviors in various species. Move very, very slowly, and pray that nobody wakes up cranky. Zek and Vel, demonstrating the adaptability that made their species such effective survivors, simply rearranged themselves on the warm spot Luna had vacated and continued their nap as if nothing had happened. Occasionally, one would chirp softly in their sleep, causing Calvex to glance over with the kind of protective vigilance that suggested he was still processing the fact that his children had essentially adopted a human. "So," Luna said, distributing steaming cups of coffee with the efficient movements of someone who had clearly done this before. "Let me see if I understand the situation correctly. Your cubs escaped from their habitat, crawled through half the station's ventilation system following the scent of my chocolate, found me asleep at my desk, and decided I made acceptable furniture." "That appears to be an accurate summary," Calvex rumbled, accepting a cup with surprising delicacy for someone with claws that could shred starship hulls. "Though I suspect their motivations were somewhat more complex." Commander Max, who had been quietly observing the proceedings with the expression of someone watching his worst nightmare transform into his most unexpected diplomatic victory, leaned forward with interest. "Complex? How?" Calvex regarded his sleeping cubs with something that might have been pride mixed with exasperation. Vexmi young are not simply motivated by hunger or comfort. They are instinctively drawn to potential allies, protectors. The fact that they chose to remain here, even after consuming whatever chocolate was available, suggests they recognized something in Dr. Luna that appealed to their deeper survival instincts. "You mean they adopted me?" Luna asked, her voice carrying a mixture of wonder and concern. "But I don't know anything about caring for Vexmi cubs. I mean, I know the theoretical requirements, temperature, humidity, nutritional needs, but actually raising them is completely different from laboratory observations." "Perhaps," suggested Fluxandra, her psychic voice carrying undertones of amusement, "that is precisely why they chose you. Young minds are remarkably perceptive about intentions. They sense that you study their species not to exploit or control, but to understand and help." The implications of this observation settled over the room like a gentle revelation. Dr. Luna's research, her endless nights spent analyzing optimal conditions for juvenile alien development, hadn't been abstract academic work. It had been preparation for something she'd never expected: actual, hands-on interspecies childcare. "My research," Luna said slowly, pieces clicking together in her caffeine-enhanced mind. "I've been working on environmental protocols for mixed-species habitats, artificial ecosystems that could support the developmental needs of multiple alien species simultaneously. It was theoretical work, intended for future colony applications, but the principles could be applied to immediate practical childcare situations," Max finished, understanding dawning in his expression. "You've essentially been studying how to create the perfect nursery for alien children." "Which explains," Calvex added with growing respect, "why my cubs felt so immediately comfortable with you. Your scent, your behavior, patterns, even your sleep posture. Everything about you signals a safe caregiver to young Vexmi." The molten delegate bubbled thoughtfully. "This suggests possibilities for expanded interspecies cooperation. If human nurturing instincts are compatible with multiple alien species' developmental needs, we could be looking at a complete revolution in diplomatic relations," the Zephyrian ambassador added, practically vibrating with excitement. "Humans as universal caretakers, interspecies childcare cooperatives, the potential for cultural exchange through shared child-rearing experiences." "Hold on," Luna said, raising her hands in a gesture of mild panic. "I agreed to study optimal habitat conditions, not become the galaxy's babysitter." I have research deadlines, grant applications, and approximately 15 different projects that are all behind schedule because I spent the night being used as a bed by two very adorable but completely unauthorized research subjects. Vel chose that moment to stretch, yawn, and produce a sound that was part purr, part chirp, and entirely calculated to melt the heart of anyone within hearing range. She opened sleepy golden eyes, spotted Luna across the room, and made a small questioning sound that clearly translated to, "Where did my favorite human go?" The effect on the assembled crowd was immediate and devastating. Even the security personnel, trained to maintain professional demeanor in all situations, found themselves making involuntary "oh" sounds. "Oh, come on," Luna muttered, but she was already moving toward the cubs with the helpless inevitability of someone who had just discovered a weakness she didn't know she possessed. "That's not fair. You can't just make adorable baby sounds and expect—" She trailed off as Vel scrambled over to her, climbed up her arm with the casual ease of someone who had done this before, and settled contentedly on her shoulder. Zek, not to be outdone, woke up and joined his sister, turning Luna into a human jungle gym for two very satisfied predator cubs. "I suppose," she said weakly, "my research could benefit from some hands-on observational data." Calvex watched this display with an expression that somehow managed to convey amusement, approval, and paternal assessment all at once. "Dr. Luna," he said formally, "would you consider accepting a consulting position with the Vexmi Council? We have been seeking ways to improve our understanding of interspecies cooperation, particularly regarding the care and development of our young in mixed communities." "You're offering me a job?" Luna asked, gently preventing Zek from investigating the inside of her coffee cup. "Based on the fact that your children decided to use me as furniture?" "Based on the fact that my children, who have never shown interest in any being outside their immediate family group, trust you completely. Based on the fact that your research directly addresses needs we didn't even know we had. And based on the fact that you just offered coffee to a roomful of strangers who invaded your laboratory at 1100 hours. Commander Max leaned back in his chair with the expression of someone watching a diplomatic miracle unfold in real time. "Dr. Luna, if you accept this position, it could establish the framework for similar cooperation agreements with dozens of other species. We're talking about a fundamental shift in how different civilizations approach childcare, education, and cultural exchange. Plus," added Barnes with a grin, "it would mean we finally have someone on staff who can handle missing alien children without triggering station-wide emergencies." Luna looked around the room, at the relieved faces of the security team, the excited expressions of the diplomats, the approving nod from Calvex, and the two small, purring creatures who had somehow decided that she was exactly what they needed. "Well," she said finally, "I suppose I could modify my research parameters to include practical applications. And it would be fascinating to study interspecies bonding patterns from a direct observational perspective. And my current lab is clearly too small if I'm going to be hosting impromptu diplomatic coffee meetings." "Is that a yes?" Max asked. Luna gently scratched behind Vel's ears, causing the cub to emit a sound of pure contentment. "That's a yes, but I'm going to need a bigger coffee maker." 3 months later, Dr. Luna's Interspecies Juvenile Development Center had become the most popular research facility on Nexus 5. Her innovative approach to cross-cultural childcare had attracted attention from species across the galaxy, and her waiting list for consultation services was longer than the queue for the station's best restaurant. Zek and Vel, now slightly larger but no less determined to use Luna as their favorite climbing structure, had become unofficial ambassadors for their species. Their willingness to interact peacefully with other alien children had led to breakthrough discoveries in interspecies socialization and had spawned a dozen collaborative research projects. And Luna, despite her initial protests about becoming the galaxy's babysitter, had found her true calling in the most unexpected way possible, by taking a nap at exactly the right time and place to become a bridge between worlds. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor after all. It just usually involved more chocolate and impromptu adoptions than most people expected.